Hello brothers and welcome to Sigma Old Man channel. Beware the man who believes he sees everything. He is often blindest to himself. It's a truth Sigma males rarely admit. While they pride themselves on reading the room, dissecting human behavior, and staying 10 steps ahead, the one territory they often misjudge is their own reflection. Psychology has long shown that people are terrible at spotting their blind spots. Studies reveal we're nearly 50% less accurate when evaluating our own flaws compared to how accurately strangers perceive them. And the Sigma, with his legendary detachment, isn't immune. In fact, that detachment makes him even more vulnerable to self-deception. He walks through life thinking he's untouchable, when in reality his greatest weaknesses sit quietly in his shadow, waiting. It's almost ironic. The very men who avoid the herd the most are often herded by their own unacknowledged patterns. And here's the kicker. If you've ever seen a Sigma convinced he's immune to influence, it's like watching a cat pretend it doesn't care about the laser pointer. Stoic on the outside, but deep down, he's chasing something he won't admit. Today, we're exposing the hidden truths Sigma males fail to see about themselves, the uncomfortable, brutally honest realities they'd rather ignore. This isn't flattery. This is the mirror they never wanted to look into. Number one, they underestimate the fear they inspire. Sigma males don't always realize how unsettling they are to other people. The very qualities they think of as neutral or normal often register as threatening in the eyes of others. Their unpredictability, their refusal to follow expected social scripts, and their tendency to stay silent when everyone else is performing, all of these things combine to create a low-level unease in those around them. People aren't always conscious of it, but they feel it. They feel it in how carefully they watch what they say around him, how quickly they second-guess their own words, or how they wait for a reaction that never comes. That unpredictability is what makes others cautious. Humans like patterns because patterns are safe. An alpha is easy to read, loud, direct, demanding. A beta is predictable too, accommodating, eager to please. But a Sigma, he doesn't signal clearly where he stands. And that silence forces people into their own insecurities. They start wondering, does he approve? Does he disapprove? Does he even notice me? That silent guessing game is exhausting, and the easiest way for people to handle it is to label him intimidating. It's not just strangers or acquaintances who feel this. Colleagues, friends, even family members can find themselves uneasy around a Sigma male because his energy doesn't allow comfort in the usual sense. He isn't hostile. Yet people instinctively tread lightly, as if one wrong word could shift his perception of them. The irony is that the Sigma often has no intention of making anyone feel uneasy. To him, he's just existing, being himself, not putting on a show. But the absence of signals creates a void, and human beings hate voids, so they fill it with fear, speculation, and overthinking. This subtle fear can even hold him back in ways he doesn't see. Some people avoid bringing him into projects because they don't know how to handle him. Some never approach him personally because they assume he'll reject them. And while he may take pride in being misunderstood, he doesn't always notice how much opportunity gets lost in that gap between who he is and how he's perceived. That fear he unconsciously inspires is both his shield and his curse. Number two, they miss how much they're still searching. Sigma males like to believe they've made peace with solitude. They carry themselves as if they've already solved the puzzle of life, as if the need for belonging or connection is something that plagues everyone else but not them. On the surface, it looks convincing. They're independent, self-sufficient, and capable of building a life without leaning on anyone. But beneath that armor, most Sigma males are still searching for something. It might not be the same kind of approval or validation others crave, but it's still a hunger they rarely admit exists. What makes this so difficult for them to see is the fact that their search doesn't always look like searching. It shows up in subtle obsessions, like pouring themselves into a passion project that has no clear end, or chasing experiences that never quite satisfy. It shows up in the way they keep one or two people closer than anyone else, almost clinging in silence while pretending they don't need the bond. It even shows up in those quiet nights when they're alone and start questioning whether their life is just self-imposed exile dressed up as freedom. The deeper truth is that Sigma males are still human, no matter how far they stand outside the crowd. Humans are wired to seek meaning, belonging, and connection, and that wiring doesn't disappear just because someone rejects shallow social games. The Sigma isn't searching for popularity or attention, but he is searching for something real, someone who sees him without being fooled by his armor, or a purpose that justifies the isolation he chooses. Until he finds that, the search continues, often disguised as detachment, wanderlust, or ambition. What makes this point even more haunting is that many Sigmas won't admit they're still searching. To do so feels like weakness, like betraying the very independence they've built their identity on. So instead they bury the need, act indifferent, and keep moving. But deep down there's a quiet restlessness they can't shake. That's the paradox. The man who seems to have walked away from the world is still, in his own way, chasing something only the world can give him. And the longer he denies it, the more the search defines him. Number 3, they fail to recognize their loneliness as a choice. Loneliness for Sigma. Males often feels like something that just happens to them, as if it's the natural price of their independence. They'll tell themselves it's inevitable, that people simply can't understand them, that relationships are too shallow, or that society doesn't have space for someone who refuses to play along. But the truth is far sharper. Their loneliness is not fate. It's a choice they keep making, over and over again, whether they admit it or not. Every time they walk away, instead of letting someone in, they choose it. Every time they dismiss a connection as not worth the energy without really testing its depth, they choose it. And every time they tell themselves it's better to be alone than to risk being disappointed, they're quietly voting for the very emptiness they claim is unavoidable. The irony is that Sigma males see themselves as brutally honest, yet they often lie to themselves in this area. They act as if life has pushed them into solitude, when in reality, they're the ones pulling the lever that closes the door. This doesn't mean their independence isn't real. It is. They genuinely function well without constant validation or shallow social bonds. But the problem arises when they confuse independence with disconnection. Independence is freedom of choice. Disconnection is the refusal to choose. And many Sigmas blur the two so deeply that they convince themselves they're victims of a lonely fate, when in fact they've been engineers of their own isolation all along. The danger of not recognizing this is that it gives loneliness more power than it deserves. If it feels like destiny, there's no fighting it. But if it's a choice, then it's something that can be changed without losing the essence of who they are. Until a Sigma male faces that truth, he'll keep repeating the same cycle, walking away, feeling misunderstood, and then calling it fate. It's not fate. It's a decision that protects him in the short term but starves him in the long run. And the sooner he admits that, the sooner he realizes loneliness was never an enemy, he was simply choosing it. Number 4, they overlook how much they secretly test people. Sigma males often underestimate just how much of their relationships are built on quiet, invisible tests. They don't announce these tests, they don't explain them, and in most cases, the other person has no idea they're even taking one. But the Sigma watches closely, withholding reactions, pulling back his presence, or deliberately going silent just to see how someone responds. To him, it feels natural, even necessary. He wants proof of loyalty, patience, or authenticity before he invests further. But what he fails to see is how unfair and exhausting this cycle can be for the people around him. When someone doesn't meet the expectation of these secret trials, disappointment sets in. The Sigma convinces himself it's evidence that the person was never genuine to begin with, when in reality they simply didn't know they were being measured against hidden rules. Silence, for instance, may be a Sigma's way of seeing who will still reach out, but to the other person, it feels like rejection. Distance may be his way of testing consistency, but to the other person it feels like abandonment. And small, subtle challenges he throws out might be his way of weighing strength. But to the other person it feels like unnecessary conflict. The most brutal part is that the Sigma often mistakes these results for truth. He'll conclude someone failed the test and quietly move on, never admitting that the game was rigged from the start. In his mind, it's protection. It filters out the weak, the fake, the temporary. But in practice, it often filters out people who might have proven themselves if only they'd been told the rules of the game. This hidden testing habit feeds into the Sigma's cycle of solitude. It reassures him that few people are trustworthy, which justifies pulling back even further. Yet he rarely admits that his methods practically guarantee disappointment. By setting traps that no one can see, he builds evidence for his own doubts and then calls it reality. What he doesn't see is that his invisible tests don't just measure people, they shape the outcome. And in the end, the loneliness he fears is partly created by the standards no one else ever knew they were being asked to meet. Number 5, they don't realize how unforgiving their memory is. Sigma males pride themselves on their ability to stay calm, detached, and unaffected, but what they often don't realize is how unforgiving their memory truly is. They keep mental records, subtle remarks, betrayals, inconsistencies, and disappointments, and those records never really fade. To the outside world, they may look like they've moved on, like they've brushed things off with their usual quiet indifference. But inside, every interaction has been logged, every shift in tone noted, every broken promise filed away. And while they might not speak of it, the weight of those memories shapes how they treat people long after the moment has passed. The danger is that Sigma males often confuse silence with closure. They won't confront you, they won't explode, and they won't make a scene. But that doesn't mean the slate is clean. They just tuck it away into their private ledger, a running list that decides whether you remain inside their circle or get slowly pushed out. In their world, loyalty and consistency matter more than anything, and once someone crosses a line, even unintentionally, the Sigma rarely lets that go. He may still deal with you, he may still be civil, but deep inside, the relationship is no longer the same. What makes this more complicated is that Sigma males sometimes convince themselves they've forgiven someone when, in reality, they've only gone quiet about the hurt. They call it moving on, but really it's just moving further away. And because they don't voice these things, the people around them rarely know why the connection suddenly feels colder, why the warmth has been replaced with distance. To the Sigma, this feels like fairness. You showed me who you are, and I adjusted accordingly. But to everyone else, it can feel like being silently sentenced without ever getting a chance to appeal. This unforgiving memory is both their strength and their curse. It protects them from being used or manipulated twice, but it also traps them in cycles of mistrust. By holding on to every misstep, they make it nearly impossible for anyone to truly start fresh with them. And the irony is the Sigma male often believes he's mastered detachment, when in truth it's his inability to fully let go that still holds him hostage. Number 6, they fail to see how enigmas breed resentment. Sigma males often pride themselves on being enigmas, believing that their mystery automatically commands respect and admiration, and in many cases it does. People are drawn to what they can't easily explain. The Sigma's silence, unpredictability, and refusal to conform give him an aura that others find magnetic. But what he fails to see is that admiration of the unknown doesn't always translate into loyalty. Over time, it can sour into frustration, envy, and even resentment. People don't just admire what they don't understand, they also begin to hate it because it makes them feel powerless. When others can't read him, they feel excluded, as though he's keeping something from them on purpose. They interpret his quiet as judgment, his independence as arrogance, and his privacy as a form of superiority. At first, this creates fascination. People lean in closer, they try harder, they chase his attention. But when their efforts fail, that fascination turns bitter. Instead of saying, "He's admirable," they start whispering, "He thinks he's better than us." And the Sigma, lost in his detachment, rarely notices this shift until the resentment has fully bloomed. The misunderstanding comes from how differently he interprets silence compared to everyone else. To him, silence is just space. It means nothing more than conserving energy, but to others it feels intentional, as if he's withholding something that should be shared. That tension builds, and people who once put him on a pedestal begin pulling him down in their minds, not because he wronged them, but because they can't stand the unease his presence creates. This is where the Sigma often misreads the room. He assumes admiration equals loyalty. He believes the people who look up to him will always stand by him. But admiration born out of mystery is shallow. It doesn't anchor itself in trust or understanding. And once the admiration wears thin, what's left is a quiet bitterness toward the man who never let anyone in. What the Sigma doesn't realize is that by staying an enigma for too long, he creates a gap people fill with their own narratives, and those narratives rarely stay kind. Mystery may spark fascination, but over time it breeds resentment strong enough to erase whatever admiration existed in the first place. Number 7, they confuse self-mastery with emotional neglect. Sigma males often wear their discipline and self-control like armor, convinced it's proof of self-mastery. They stay calm when others lose their cool. They keep their emotions locked down, and they present themselves as unshakable. To them, this feels like strength. But what they rarely see is that sometimes this stoicism is less about control and more about avoidance. What they call discipline is often a way of burying feelings they don't want to confront. And the longer they bury them, the heavier those emotions grow. Instead of admitting hurt, they frame it as indifference. Instead of acknowledging anger, they swallow it in the name of restraint. Instead of facing grief or vulnerability, they tell themselves they've moved on. But in reality, nothing has been processed. It's just been shoved into a corner of the mind where it festers quietly. They think they've mastered themselves by refusing to react, when in fact they've neglected the emotional work that real mastery demands. True self-mastery isn't about pretending emotions don't exist. It's about understanding them, managing them, and letting them move through you without control being lost. The danger here is subtle. By refusing to face emotions head-on, Sigma males sometimes cut themselves off from the very experiences that could deepen their lives. Their avoidance may protect them from breakdowns or public displays of weakness, but it also prevents growth. Pain that isn't processed turns into distrust. Anger that isn't released hardens into bitterness. Vulnerability that's suppressed turns into isolation. Over time, the cost of this emotional neglect is far greater than the temporary discomfort of confronting it. To others, it can look like strength, but people close to them often feel the distance. A partner might sense the walls. A friend might notice how little the Sigma shares, and while they might admire his composure, they also feel shut out of his true self. The Sigma believes he's showing them discipline, but what they see is someone who refuses to be fully human. That's the paradox. In trying so hard to prove mastery, he sometimes proves the opposite. Because real mastery isn't silence, it's honesty. And until the Sigma faces what he fears inside, his discipline is just another form of neglect, disguised as power. Number 8, they underestimate how intimidating their calm is. Sigma males pride themselves on their calm, thinking it's a sign of control, confidence, or even detachment. They sit quietly, watch the world, and respond only when necessary, believing their stillness makes them appear composed and unshakable. But what they rarely realize is how much that calm can actually intimidate others. People around them rarely interpret neutrality as neutrality. Instead, it feels like judgment, assessment, or even quiet disapproval. The very act of doing nothing, of simply existing without giving feedback or emotion, creates tension that others instinctively try to resolve. Humans are wired to respond to signals, smiles, gestures, words, reactions. When a Sigma doesn't give any, it leaves a void, and humans hate voids. That blankness forces people to fill in the gaps themselves, often imagining criticism or disapproval where none exists. A colleague waits nervously for the Sigma to comment. A friend overthinks every word, afraid of crossing some invisible line. Even casual acquaintances feel pressure to perform or prove themselves, and the Sigma, lost in his own world, rarely notices the ripple of unease his quiet creates. The irony is that the Sigma doesn't intend to intimidate. He isn't trying to dominate or manipulate. He's simply operating at his own pace, thinking his calm is invisible, when in reality it's loud. Silence that feels like serenity to him can feel like scrutiny to others. Neutrality that feels like fairness to him can feel like judgment. And because the Sigma doesn't adjust or explain, people naturally react with heightened awareness, anxiety, or even resentment. This creates a unique dynamic. The Sigma becomes both respected and feared, admired but avoided. He assumes his calm earns him trust, when often it just keeps people at a distance. His presence commands attention without effort, but the effect isn't always positive. The very strength he sees in himself, the ability to remain composed under any circumstance, is also what subtly unsettles everyone else. And until the Sigma realizes how his silence communicates as much as words, he will remain a mystery, powerful, yet quietly alienating those who cross his path. Number 9, their lone wolf status makes them predictable. Sigma males often pride themselves on being the ultimate lone wolf, convinced that their independence makes them unpredictable, untouchable, and immune to social manipulation. They refuse to follow trends, reject groupthink, and move through life on their own terms. To them, this detachment feels like a superpower, proof that they can navigate the world without being boxed in or controlled. What they fail to see, however, is the ironic trap hidden in their isolation. By always refusing the herd, they create a new kind of pattern, one that sharp observers notice and exploit. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. Even when someone appears untethered, observers unconsciously pick up on habits, routines, and behaviors over time. The Sigma's avoidance of social norms, his methods of disengaging from people, and his consistent way of evaluating others become predictable to those who are paying attention. They notice when he retreats, when he tests, when he distances himself, and when he decides someone is worth his energy. Even his silence, which feels random to him, forms a rhythm that others can learn to anticipate. This predictability has consequences the Sigma rarely considers. People may start adjusting their own behavior in subtle ways, waiting him out, manipulating situations to provoke a reaction, or exploiting his need for control over interactions. The very independence he sees as armor can become a lever for others to influence him without him ever realizing it. The patterns he's blind to may subtly dictate how others treat him, when opportunities appear, and who truly gains access to his trust. The most ironic part is that the Sigma believes unpredictability comes from rejecting the herd, but true unpredictability isn't about isolation. It's about understanding oneself deeply enough to act intentionally, without letting patterns control behavior. By failing to see that his lone wolf identity has its own rhythms, he underestimates how visible his choices are to those who study him carefully. His independence may shield him from crowds, but it also exposes him to a different kind of predictability, one that quietly shapes how the world interacts with him, often to his disadvantage. In short, the Sigma's pride in being untouchable blinds him to a subtle truth. Solitude doesn't make him unpredictable, it just makes him a mystery people learn to read over time. Number 10. They're blind to how often they self-sabotage relationships. Sigma males often believe they're simply protecting themselves when it comes to relationships. They assume that others can't truly handle their intensity, independence, or complexity, so they hold people at a distance. To them, it's a defensive strategy, preemptively avoiding disappointment, conflict, or intrusion. What they rarely realize, however, is just how often this protective instinct turns into self-sabotage. They push people away before intimacy even has a chance to form, shutting doors that might have led to meaningful connection. The pattern is subtle and almost invisible to the Sigma himself. He doesn't lash out or create drama, he simply retreats, withholds, or disengages. Silence becomes a test, distance becomes a shield, and avoidance becomes a habit. From his perspective, he's maintaining control and preserving his independence. But from the outside, it often looks like disinterest, coldness, or rejection. People who might have been willing to understand or meet him halfway are left confused and hurt, slowly pulling back as well. By the time he notices the distance, he interprets it as proof that others couldn't handle him, rather than recognizing his own role in creating it. Ironically, this self-sabotage reinforces the very belief he started with. The Sigma thinks, "See, nobody can handle me," without realizing that his own actions shaped that outcome. Relationships fail not because others are incapable, but because he preemptively set the terms to avoid vulnerability. Even when someone shows patience, understanding, or genuine interest, he might misread it, test it unnecessarily, or withdraw again, perpetuating the cycle. This blind spot has real consequences. Opportunities for deep connection, loyalty, or even love are lost, often replaced by frustration or loneliness. The Sigma believes he's preserving himself, but in truth he's undermining his own chances at the very bonds he claims to value. By not seeing how often he initiates the push away, he remains trapped in a cycle where independence feels safer than intimacy, even when intimacy might actually enrich his life. The harsh truth is that Sigma males often sabotage themselves long before anyone else has the chance, and the irony is that the isolation they defend themselves with is frequently of their own making. Number 11. They hide behind mystery without realizing it becomes a crutch. Sigma males often pride themselves on being mysterious. seeing it as a mark of strength, independence, and self-possession. Their silence, selective sharing, and subtle restraint make them seem untouchable, enigmatic, and in control. To the outside world, this aura of mystery is magnetic. But what they rarely recognize is that mystery isn't always power. It can easily become a crutch. By hiding behind it, they avoid confronting uncomfortable truths, difficult emotions, or messy realities they'd rather not face. The danger lies in the way mystery can disguise avoidance. When a Sigma doesn't answer a question, sidesteps vulnerability, or refuses to clarify intentions, it often isn't a calculated display of superiority. It's a shield against engagement. Every unanswered question or withheld detail is an opportunity to dodge accountability, deflect emotional risk, or keep someone at arm's length. Over time, the Sigma may convince himself that he's projecting control, when in reality he's just creating distance to avoid the work of real self-reflection and connection. Ironically, this reliance on mystery can limit his power rather than enhance it. People admire what they don't understand, but they also grow frustrated with the lack of clarity. The Sigma who uses mystery as armor may find himself misunderstood, isolated, or misjudged. Relationships stagnate, opportunities slip by, and influence wanes, not because others can't appreciate him, but because his avoidance has created a barrier that even the most persistent or loyal individuals struggle to cross. What the Sigma often misses is that true strength doesn't come from being unreadable. It comes from choosing what to reveal and when, with intention rather than fear. Mystery becomes a crutch when it replaces courage, introspection, and authentic engagement. The longer he relies on it, the more he risks confusing perception with reality, thinking he's untouchable, when really he's just avoiding what he hasn't yet dealt with. In the end, mystery only feels like power when it's intentional. When it's a habit born of avoidance, it quietly erodes the very influence, respect, and connection the Sigma believes it protects. What he calls strategy is often just a defense mechanism in disguise, and the sooner he recognizes that, the sooner he can transform mystery from a crutch into a conscious tool. Number 12. They fail to see how much they crave recognition. Sigma males pride themselves on their independence and often convince themselves that they don't need validation from anyone. They tell themselves that recognition is irrelevant, that approval is a distraction, and that their worth exists entirely within their own standards. On the surface, this makes them appear unshakable, self-contained, and almost untouchable. Yet if you look closer, the truth is far more complicated. Subtle behaviors, unconscious choices, and the way they interact with the world reveal a quiet, persistent craving for recognition that they rarely acknowledge, even to themselves. The craving doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up in small, almost invisible ways. Sigma males carefully choose who to share their achievements with, often selecting people whose approval feels meaningful, even if they would never admit it. They position themselves strategically, not just to maintain independence, but to be noticed, to be respected, or to silently prove their value to those who matter. Even their detachment and stoicism, which they frame as immunity to outside opinion, can act as a way of shaping perception, making them seem rare, competent, and untouchable. These are not random actions, they're subtle, calculated, and deeply human expressions of the desire to be recognized. The irony is that the Sigma may genuinely believe he is above validation, yet his entire social rhythm is influenced by it. By avoiding obvious approval seeking, he makes the recognition he does receive feel far more rewarding, almost addictive. A nod of respect, acknowledgement from someone he respects, or the quiet realization that he's noticed by the right people can have an outsized effect precisely because he claims he doesn't care. What he fails to see is that this craving isn't weakness, it's part of being human. But denying it to himself creates blind spots. He misreads admiration, undervalues genuine appreciation, or overestimates his detachment, thinking it separates him from normal desires. In reality, recognition quietly shapes his choices, his pride, and his relationships, whether he admits it or not. The Sigma's independence doesn't erase the need to be seen, it only disguises it, making subtle, unconscious signals of validation a constant undercurrent in his life. And until he confronts that, he's both craving and denying the same thing at the same time. Sigma males carry themselves as enigmas, independent, self-sufficient, and untouchable. But beneath that carefully constructed exterior lies a complexity they rarely acknowledge. Their independence, calm, and mystery are often double-edged. They create admiration, yes, but also tension, misunderstanding, and isolation. They test people without revealing it, build walls under the guise of self-mastery, and chase solitude while secretly craving connection and recognition. They pride themselves on emotional control, yet sometimes that control masks avoidance. They present mystery as power, when it's often a crutch. Even their so-called freedom carries patterns others quietly observe and exploit, and their silence, neutrality, and detachment unintentionally intimidate and alienate. The harsh truth is that Sigma males are human, with the same desires, blind spots, and contradictions everyone else has, but they are less willing to admit them. Their greatest strength is their self-awareness and ability to operate outside the herd, yet their greatest blind spot is themselves. By failing to see the subtle ways they sabotage relationships, mask vulnerabilities, and crave acknowledgement, they risk repeating the same patterns in solitude, misunderstanding, and frustration. Understanding these hidden truths isn't about tearing down their identity. It's about clarity. The Sigma male who sees these blind spots can turn what once limited him into tools for growth, to navigate relationships more consciously, to wield his independence with intention, and to embrace his humanity without fear of losing power. Real mastery isn't about perfection, silence, or detachment. It's about knowing yourself fully, including the parts you'd rather ignore. The Sigma male's journey isn't just about walking alone, it's about walking intentionally, seeing the hidden forces within, and learning that strength isn't the absence of flaws, but the courage to confront them. Those who do this don't just survive outside the herd, they thrive. If this gave you a fresh perspective on Sigma males and their hidden truths, don't just scroll past. Hit that subscribe button to stay updated on all our deep dives. Like the video if it opened your eyes. Comment your thoughts or experiences and share it with anyone who's ready to uncover the realities most people overlook. Every click helps more people see what even Sigma males fail to recognize about themselves.